Good Vach, Shalom Tov. Hope you're all well. Hope you all had a beautiful Yom Tov. We are going to catch up for the last 3 days. We still have to catch up for the first 3 days of Yom Tov. We'll get there. I apologize for never getting around to that yet. Hopefully tomorrow. Okay, Kuf Chav Vav Amud Beis. I believe that's what we're up to, and we're going to pick up from Darash of Yitzchak Nafcha Prischa Dereish Galusa. I think that's what we're up to. Yes, that's what we're up to. Okay, so Rav Yitzchak Nafcha said something at the entrance, taught at the entrance of the house of the head of the political head, which is known as the Reish Galusa. He says halacha like Rabbi Eliezer. He says halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer, who said that a window shutter, can only be used if the window shutter is suspended from the wall, meaning it has to be attached, and it can't be on the ground. It has to be still hanging from the air, right? In other words, our windows have covers, have windows. Their windows have like a block of wood basically covering it, or a block of something covering it. And so the only way you could use that window shutter is if it's attached to the wall and it's not dragging on the ground. It has to be suspended in the air. Masir Rav Amram asked the questions. There's a story. It's a story from later on. We're going to see in Daf Kuf Nun Zayin, where it's going to talk about a scenario where there were two rooms which were attached. There's a window in between, and they wanted to ensure that tumah, that impurity from a corpse, did not go from one to the other, from one room to the other. And so basically they measured to make sure that they had something that was like a tefach large. So they measured, and then they went ahead and they tied something to the window, okay, and they cover the window. They shutter the window. So you see that you're allowed to shutter something in the window. That was something which was not attached. That does not go like Rabbi Eliezer. So Amar Abaye, my datich. Why are you asking a question from here? Because it teaches this ruling anonymously, and therefore you think it's an authoritative ruling, meaning that Mishnah which spoke about them using a shutter is an anonymous ruling. Neger hanigrar nami stamahi. A bolt which drags is also an anonymous Mishnah, and that Mishnah which spoke with the bolt that drags, we saw it earlier, that goes like Eliezer. So we have one stama, we have one anonymous Mishnah, another anonymous Mishnah. Why are you bothered by anonymous Mishnah that you're quoting? There's another anonymous Mishnah which supports the view of Rabbi Eliezer. Now, what's the significance of an anonymous Mishnah? The significance is that when Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the author, the editor of the Mishnayos, who wrote things, he could have attributed each Mishnah to a particular person, and sometimes when he did not attribute it to someone, what he was implying is that this is agreed upon by all. That's why he doesn't attribute it to a single person. It actually makes it more authoritative. So again, we start off by saying Alachos like Eliezer. We said, hey, how could it be Alachos like Eliezer? There's a Stam Mishnah, there's an anonymous Mishnah which does not go like him. But then we said, but there is an anonymous Mishnah which does go like him. So nonetheless, the Gemara says, Vafil Hachi Ma'aser Rav. The Mishnah which was anonymous but was also a story, that is actually greater proof. What that means is as follows. You could ask a Rav a Shaila, okay? And he can give you an answer. But what you don't know when he gives the answer, is he giving you the answer because of who you are, because of this particular scenario? Meaning sometimes he thinks maybe you need more safeguarding around, Shabbos or Kashrus, so he's going to be maybe more stringent with you. Or maybe he thinks you're too stringent, and therefore maybe he thinks because of the circumstances he's going to give a leniency. We don't really know what he really, really holds across the board. But when there's a particular story that happens, and a rabbi is involved in the story, we know what they hold like, right? And there's books written called Ma'aser Rav, of all the great rabbis who people were like kind of watching them as they went through their day. Their own practice, that is the most authoritative of all. And that's why the Gemara is bothered by saying that Alachos like Eliezer, because we have a Stam Mishnah, the Mishnah in later on in the Masechta, which does not go like Rabbi Eliezer, and it's a story where rabbis were not going like Rabbi Eliezer. That already isn't authoritative. That's the more authoritative than a regular, a Stam Mishnah, an anonymous Mishnah, which is not a story. Okay, now the Gemara, next Mishnah, last Mishnah in the 17th parak. Any vessel cover that has handles, is allowed to be taken on Shabbos. Only when it covers holes in the ground. When it covers vessels, whether it has a handle or not, is allowed to be moved on Shabbos. Okay, the Gemara is going to explain what's going on over here. When the Mishnah said that the cover of utensil does not need to have a handle and it's not muksa, that's only when the cover of the utensil actually has a function of its own. So let's say it's a cover of a pot, you could still use it to carry some things in the cover of the pot, and therefore it still has a function. But if let's say it's very flat, it has no function whatsoever, it can't do anything other than covering the pot, and it doesn't have a handle, then it's seen as muksa. Okay, then the Gemara continues. In ilolo. Everyone agrees. Now we're going to explain further what the Mishnah is talking about. When it comes to holes in the ground, covers of holes in the ground, everyone agrees if it has a handle, it could be moved on Shabbos. Doesn't, it doesn't. So, for example, you have a sewage hole, a hole or electric hole. Those holes, they have the covers I'm blanking on the term. It's been a long yom tov. Okay, has the cover. So if it has a handle on it, then it's a utensil, and you're allowed to move it on Shabbos. If it doesn't have a handle on it, you can't move it on Shabbos. The typical grate that we have covering like the electric holes or a sewage hole, you would not be allowed to move that on Shabbos. It's muksa. Okay, fine. Kisei kelim. If it is a cover of a movable utensil, everyone agrees. Even if it doesn't have a handle, it can be moved as long as it's still somewhat functional. Okay, like we just said a moment ago, it has to be a functional kli, a functional utensil on its own. Ki pligi, when do they disagree? When do the Tanakama and Rav Yossi and our mission disagree? Bekilim dechabrina ba'ara, regarding utensils that are attached to the ground. Mar savar, for example, like an oven, or maybe in our house is like a toilet. Right, a toilet is attached to the ground. Mar savar gazrinan. One holds that we compare this to the ground itself, and by the ground everyone agrees needs to have a handle. And one says we do not make this decree, and therefore, since it's not really it's not really part of the ground, it's only attached to the ground, therefore it does not need to have a handle. Lishnachrina, an alternative version, which according to many is really saying the same thing. When do they disagree? Because the tanor, the cover of an oven, one says it's like the cover of a hole in the ground. The oven in those days was attached to the ground. Our ovens are not really attached to the ground, but their ovens were attached to the ground. And one says it's like the cover of a hole in the ground. And one says it's like the cover of an ordinary utensil, and therefore it is does not need to have a handle because regular utensil the cover does not need a handle. Okay, not so relevant to us. Again, the manhole, that's the word I'm looking for. The manhole covers, those are relevant. Those are muksa. Again, of course, if there's a dangerous situation where someone left it uncovered and someone could fall into it, you'd be allowed to move it. Fine. We just finished the 17th parak. We're about to begin the 15th parak, which is now going to discuss the halachos of exertion, doing excessive exertion. Okay, we're eventually going to get to discussions of like exercise on Shabbos and things like that. Okay, a person's allowed to clear away on Shabbos even 4 or 5 boxes of straw or grain because of guests, because of let's say you have a base measure which is covered in grain or straw, and the only way people are going to learn there is if it's cleared away. So that would also be a mitzvah. You're allowed to do so. Of a lo as otzar, but not a store. Okay, we'll see what that word lo as otzar means. We'll see 2 opinions in a moment. Okay, now we have a whole list of the different things that can be moved. We're talking over here not about muksa. We're about to get into a list of what's muksa, what's not muksa. But right now the point of this thing of 4 or 5 boxes is to teach us that you are only allowed to have limited exertion on Shabbos. You can't go overboard in your exertion on Shabbos. Okay, and therefore it limits it at 4 or 5 boxes. And even then, that's only if it's for guests. And the Aruch HaShulchan and others point out, it doesn't just mean like any guest. Like if you're just having like your next door neighbor over, it means someone who really needs a meal, like real hachnasas orchim, or for people being able to learn the base medrash. Those are real big mitzvos, and therefore you're allowed to do it for that reason. And then a loas otzar, not for store, not a store. And again, we'll see what that means. The Mishnah continues. We're allowed to move truma that is tar, udumai and demai. We'll define all these things soon. Meiser rishon, shenilo trumaso meiser rishon, which is what goes to Levi when the truma was taken. Meiser sheni v'hekdesh niftu, and meiser sheni or consecrated produce that was redeemed. Vat trumaso yavish, and a dried trumas. Trumas is a type of bean. Because it's food for goats. Of a loas tevel, but not food which are called tevel. Tevel means that no trumas were taken. Velos meiser rishon shlo niftu trumaso, nor meiser rishon whose truma has not been taken. Velos meiser sheni v'hekdesh shlo niftu, nor meiser sheni or holy items, things which are consecrated, which were not redeemed. Velos aluf, not luf. Luf is a type of legume that is not fit for food at all. The only way to have it food is to make it for food is if it's cooked, but you can't cook it on Shabbos. Therefore, it is muksa. Right? Things that need to be cooked. Let's say you have in your freezer, you have a piece of meat, raw meat. That's muksa. It's muksa. People don't realize that. You open your freezer, you have meat in your freezer. It's muksa. Okay, but not mustard, because mustard, in order to be edible, has to be ground, and there you can't grind something on Shabbos. From Shimon Gamliel says luf is allowed. Why? Because it's food for ravens, and apparently the aristocratic people used to have ravens as a sign of their wealth, and therefore Shimon Gamliel says even if you don't own a raven, if you're a poor person, you're still allowed to use luf. Luf is not muksa, since there are people who use luf for their ravens. Chavile kash, bundles of stubble, the chavile eitz and bundles of twigs, the chavile is redim and bundles of tender reeds. If a person set them aside for animal feed, meaning they designated this for eating, then you're allowed to move them. If it was not designated, then you're not allowed to move them. We'll discuss that part of the Mishnah later on as well. Says the Gemara. Again, the Mishnah began by saying you can move 5 or 4 boxes. Why would you say 5 or 4 boxes? Once you say you're allowed to move 5 boxes, of course you can move 4 boxes. Right? Why would you say 5 or 4? So Amr Achizdos, there's going to see 2 possible answers. Amr Achizdos says Arba Me Chamesh. What it means is, let's say you have a room that's covered with a lot of straw. Okay. Now keep in mind their floors were covered with were made of dirt. Okay. So what the Mishnah is saying over here is you're allowed to take 4/5 of it. Okay, meaning 4 boxes worth, but leave the last one on the ground. Why? Because if you're going to completely uncover the ground, you're going to find holes in the ground, and then you're going to go on flats in the ground, and you're going to be over on bona. We saw this before. You're going to be in violation of the prohibition of building on Shabbos. Okay, so that's so Arba Mechamesh, 4 boxes worth from a store of produce containing only 5 boxes. Okay, and then that's why it says 4. V'chamesh, why does it say 5? Me'oter gadol, to teach us in a large storage of produce where you have a huge room, huge room. The maximum you could take is 5. Okay, but in that case, of course, you're going to have more left on the ground because you're not going to take them all. My avalos oter. Okay, what does the last line of the Mishnah mean? The last line of that phrase when it says not the store, loas oter, shlo yasla ba'oter tchila. You're not allowed to begin to take produce from a previously unused store. If you have produce stored away somewhere, which wasn't you weren't using it, okay, it's like closed off area, and you haven't used it yet to serve, to feed animals or whatever it is, then you're not allowed to begin to take produce from that place, from a previously unused store. Umani, who is the opinion of this Mishnah? Yehuda, he is Muksa, Yehuda, who holds of Muksa. I mean, everyone holds a Muksa. What it means, Yehuda holds a more stringent view of Muksa, and he holds that even though the food is fit for an animal, since it wasn't used, this storage area was not used for an animal yet, therefore, you cannot use it unless you start using it for the animal. So let's say you have, a person has, a cellar where they keep like a ton of stuff set aside, and they haven't really brought it upstairs to use it in their house yet. So Rabbi Yehuda would hold until you start using it, it's completely muksa. You have to go and like start using it, or say I'm going to start using this, then it would not be muksa. That's Rabbi Yehuda's more limited. He's more limited in terms of a more expansive view of what's included in muksa. Okay, Shmuel has a different version, a different interpretation. 4 or 5. Why does it say 4 or 5? And now on Kuf Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, it's just the vernacular. That's the way people speak. People say, a kid asks, how many candies do you have? You have 2 or 3. Okay, of course they're going to take 3. They're a kid, they want a candy, right? So you say 4 or 5. That's just the way people speak. And truth is, it's not even 4 or 5. You can take even more. But what does it mean? Not the store. You can't clear out the entire place. Wherever it is, there's a limitation. You can't take out the entire place. Why? Like we already spoke about earlier, because you're going to come to level out the holes. But you're allowed to begin taking produce even from a previously unused store. Okay, this obviously is not like the earlier version we just saw earlier. Umani, whose opinion does this reflect, according to this way of reading it? Rav Shimon, who delays muksa. Rav Shimon, who quote literally means does not hold of a broad interpretation of muksa, means a more limited version of muksa, and he holds that even though it wasn't designated, since the produce is food that could be used by an animal, therefore it's totally fine. Okay, Tanar Ban, we have a brisa. The brisa says we may not begin taking produce from previously unused store, but you could make a path through the unused store so that you could enter and leave. Okay, the Gemara is going to be puzzled by this. It says you're allowed to make a path through it, but it says you can't begin taking produce, right? If it's muksa, you can't take produce, right? That's why we're saying you can't take produce because muksa. Then how are you allowed to make a path in it? If it's muksa, you can't move it. So the Gemara says, it says it is muksa, but you're allowed to make a path through it with your legs when you enter and leave the storage area. Now this brisa over here, we could keep on going, but it's such a critical brisa because there's 2 ways interpreting it, which has huge ramifications for the laws of muksa. The Chazon Ish says, look, what does it tell? This is the first time we've seen that you're allowed to move muksa with your feet. But the case is what? The case is where I need to go through this area. There's a storage room filled with grain, and I need to go from here, from point A to point B. The only way to get to point B, it seems, is to make a path through here. I'm allowed to walk through it, and I move the muksa with my feet. Okay? That's so, but what's the case talking about? It's a case where I'm going somewhere. I'm not doing it because I care about the muksa over here. I'm doing it because I need to get somewhere else. Okay, so it says the Chazon Ish, I'm only allowed to move muksa with my feet in a kila achar yad, in a roundabout fashion, only if it's because it's like in the way. I need moving it because there's a benefit. There's something I'm trying to get to, but it's not for the muksa itself. The muksa itself I'm not using. Okay, and that would mean, let's say you have an Amazon package that comes outside and it's your brand new iPhone, okay, and you're afraid it's going to get stolen, right? So according to the Chazon Ish, you're allowed to kick it inside? Absolutely not. Why would I be allowed to be kicking it inside? If it's in the way when I'm walking, I'm allowed to move it and kick it inside. Fine. But if it's not, I'm able to walk over it, which is 9 out of 10 times, 10 out of 10 times, right? Can't move it, can't kick it. The Mishnah Berurah says no. You could infer from here, we're not going to get into all the back and forth right now, but the Mishnah Berurah says no. This is not limited to a case where I need to get through, but rather there's a global, universal rule. Anytime I have muksa, I'm allowed, even if it's any type of muksa, even if it's a muksa, which like we saw earlier, muksa machmas chisar kiss or things like that, I'm not allowed to move, or even a klish machmas isra, I'm not allowed to move to protect it from the sun, but I'm not allowed to move it to protect it. I'm allowed to move it for if I need it for a permitted use. I'm allowed to move it if I need the space that it's in. I can't just move it to protect it. But if I'm moving with my feet, says the Mishnah Berurah, we learned from this Gemara, I could, and therefore I get an Amazon package outside, and it's full of muksa, and I want to move it inside. No problem. Okay. Taner Bana, let's go further. Taner Bana we taught in Bryce tu atzvura. You have a case of piled grain. Bisman shischaba me'erev Shabbos. If you started using it before Shabbos, most of the time of Shabbos, you're allowed to take provisions from it on Shabbos. We love us the time of Shabbos. To Rav Shimon says if you didn't start using it before Shabbos, it's aser. That should bother you. We'll come back to that in a second. Rav Shimon is always the more lenient one when it comes to muksa. Rav Acha says it's allowed. Klapilai, the Gemara says, what? Which direction is it going in? Rav Shimon being machmir about muksa doesn't make any sense. Elaima, rather, you're right. We made a mistake. The first opinion is that of Rav Acha. Rav Shimon matter. Rav Shimon really permits it. Okay, let's go. Another Bryce Tana. Kamashir Tavua Tzivura. Okay, so the more machmir view, whether it's Rav Acha or Rav Yehuda, who said that if you have a storage of grain that is muksa because it's stored away until you start using it, you can't. It's muksa, right? So how much is stored to be a problematic? Lesech is a large pile. Okay, fine. Same question. Shir tzvura. What is the amount that constitutes a piled grain? The pile, it's a piled grain is a lesech. Okay, if it's piled, it's a lesech is the measurement. I don't have the exact translation of what that is, but basically it's a large measurement. Okay, ibailu. We have a question. Is it that you could only do 4 or 5 boxes, but no more? And therefore the Mishnah is telling us that I want you to walk less. Again, the Mishnah is focusing on I don't want you to exert yourself too much. So is it 4 or 5 is the maximum? I can't walk more than that. Or maybe you could say 4 or 5, but certainly if you use 10 boxes, it's better because then each load is a lighter load. Right? You could hear both ways. When it said 4 or 5, is it coming to say only 4 or 5 boxes? Because I don't want you to walk 4 or 5 times. Now, even though those 5 boxes will be packed to the brim, it doesn't matter. You're only walking 5 times. It's a limit on your exertion. Or could we say 4 or 5? But if you want to do 10 boxes, the measurement of 4 or 5, granted, it's the volume of 4 or 5 boxes. But in terms of the amount of trips, if you do even more trips, if you take the volume of 5 boxes and you do it in 10 trips, even better because you've exerted yourself less. Which one is it? Or do we say no? They don't want you to exert yourself too much, and therefore you could only walk, you could only carry 5 times. Okay? Tashma, let's try to bring a resolution. The Tani Chada, one Bryce that says, one Bryce says you're allowed to clear away even 4 or 5 boxes or jugs of oil or jugs of wine. Another Bryce that says 10 or 15. So what is the conflict between these two Bryces? Why does one say 5, one says 10, and in that second Bryce it's 10 or 15? Maybe the first one says 4 or 5 because it's better to walk less. And the other one says 10 or 15 is because reducing the load is actually better. So maybe it's machlokes in the Bryce says machlokes tanaim. The Gemara says no. Maybe there's no proof. Maybe reducing the walking, everyone would agree, is preferable. In other words, 4 or 5 is really the limit. And so how do you reconcile these different seemingly conflicting Bryces? Who says the 10 or 15 is referring to the boxes? It's referring to the jugs. Lokasha, and therefore there's no contradiction. The Bryce says 4 or 5 is talking about a case where you carry 1 jug in each box. And the Bryce that says you do 10 is referring to 10 jugs, and therefore you do 2 jugs per box. And the one that says 15 jugs is referring to a case where we do 3 jugs in each box, uvidikure de harpanya, and we're talking about small jugs like they have in a place called harpanya. Okay, ibailu. Another question. The 4 or 5 that was mentioned. Is it so even if you have many guests, or is it depend on the amount of guests that you have? Right. In other words, is it that that it's 4 or 5 for one single guest, and therefore if you had 2 guests, it would be 10 boxes, or is 4 or 5 the absolute limit? You could have 100 guests, you could only allow to move 10 boxes. And even if you want to say that you're allowed to move 5 boxes per guest, is that one person allowed to, let's say I'm hosting 20 guests, so I can now do 100 boxes, right? So am I allowed to move all 100 boxes worth of grain, or do I need to, does each person need to move it for themselves? I mean, if I'm doing one person has each person has a limit of 5 boxes. I could get 20 other people to help me move 5 boxes each, but I can't do all 100 by myself. So that's what right, fine. That's the next question. Tashma, let's try to bring a resolution. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi once went to a certain place to go give a shir on Shabbos, and the place he was given to give the shir was a very small place. He went to the field and found the field filled with bundles of produce. Okay, how he's carrying out in a field, the post can discuss. Rebbe cleared away the entire field to make room for his students. So what do you see from there? You see that he's not limiting it 5 boxes, the whole field worth. So he must have moved like 100 boxes worth, okay? Rav Yosef and Rav Hoshia, Pam Achas Salach Rabbi Chia L'Makom Echad. Rav Chia also once went to a certain place to give a shir on Shabbos. When he saw the place was filled up too cramped for his students, and he went to the fields and found a field filled with bundles of produce. And Rav Chia cleared away all the bundles. Okay, clearly we see it's not a limit of 5 boxes because each of these people are moving many boxes away. But still, the question is one person allowed to do it, or is each person limited to 5 boxes? Like Gemara says, the story says that Rebbe himself moved all the boxes, and therefore you see one person is allowed to move it for everyone. The Gemara says, no. You think Rebbe really moved it? Why is the Gemara pushing back on this? Because Rebbe was brilliantly wealthy. Rebbe was known to be one of the wealthiest people that ever lived. Okay, so there's no way Rebbe would walk around with the whole entourage, people pulling, rolling red carpets in front of him. There's no way Rebbe's going to sit there and start moving the boxes by himself. Not a chance in the world. And therefore, when it says Rebbe moved them, it means Rebbe instructed people to move it for him, and therefore you can't bring a proof from there. Right? Rather, it could mean that he instructed others clear it away, and therefore, really, each person has a limit of 5. So each one of his servants, let's say, cleared 5 boxes away. Okay, now we go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah said you're allowed to clear boxes because of guests and to ensure that they're studying the base matter. Says the Gemara. Receiving guests is as great as going early to learn the base matters. Because it says because of guests. The Mishnah said because of guests and equates that to learning the base matters. So Rav Dimi says it's even greater than rising early, right? Because the author of the Mishnah chose to put orchin, guest, first. The Mishnah says because of guest, and then it says to ensure there's not a prevention of people learning the base matters. You see, having guests is even greater than learning the base matters. A very famous Gemara, receiving guests is greater than interacting with the divine presence. And he said, and Avram said, after Hashem visited him, after his bris milah, Hashem is talking to him, and what does Avram do? He says, Hashem, if I find favor in your eyes, please wait here. Imagine that. Like, it's so crazy. We learned this as a kid, but it's such a crazy thing. He's in the middle of experiencing prophecy, according to this interpretation, right? And he sees guests coming by, and he says, Hashem, hold on. Crazy, unbelievable. I'm a Rebbe Elazar, but you see how great Achanas Darchim is in our tradition. I'm Rebbe Elazar Baruch Shloki Minas Hakadosh Baruch Hu Minas Bas V'Dam. How unlike the way of Hashem compared to that of flesh and blood. Minas Bas V'Dam, regular people in Katan Yach Lomer Legadol Hamtin Et Shavei Ezlacha. If you're talking to your boss, you don't say, "Oh, can you hold on a minute?" You just can't do it. We find Avram doing that to Hashem, and that is not only okay, it's seen as a good thing. There's 6 things where you can enjoy. Of course, you get reward in the world to come. You also enjoy benefit in this world as well. What are those? Receiving guests, and visiting the sick, and concentrating during davening, and rising early to learn. And a person raises children to study Torah, and when judge their friend favorably. I'm not going to go through each one, but when the Gemara says that there's benefit in this world, that means now you're getting reward in this world. That means there's benefit. So for example, judging a person favorably, you have a choice, right? People do things to you, and you could judge them unfavorably and say that they're out to get you, and guess what? You'll live a miserable life. Or you could judge people favorably, and you'll have an amazing life. You'll have, you won't see people in a negative light, and often people are not malicious, people are not bad. And so it's not saying you're going to get reward. What it's saying is that, right, we don't get reward in this world. We get reward in the world to come. What it means is that if you do these things, you're going to live a more pleasant life. Danas chaver lechav is just one example, but you do these things, it's just going to be more pleasant for you when you look at people in a more positive light. Okay, ask the Gemara, Aini, is this so? Is this so? These are the 6 things, right? 6 things implies that these are the 6 things. We learned in the Mishnah, famous Mishnah, we say every day, there's 6 things. There's 6 things where you enjoy the fruits in this world, and the principle remains intact in the world to come. What are they? Keep it of aim, honoring one's mother and father, and kindness. Bring peace between people. And Talmud Torah is the best of all of them. But the point is, the Mishnah says, these are they. These are the ones, implying there are no others. So clearly, there are no others that have the same quality of benefit in this world and the world to come. So the Gemara answers, Hani Nami V'Hani Shaychi. The ones in Rav Yochanan's list are actually included in the list of 6. Okay, so for example, when it says, having guests and visiting the sick, that is included in Gemilas Chasadim. When it says, judging people favorably, that is included in making peace between people, right? So the point is that raising your children and going to study is included in Talmud Torah, right? The point is they're included in one another. The most interesting one that the Mefarshim bring down to me is that it says that studying to feel that davening is included in Chesed. Why is davening included in Chesed? So the Mefarshim suggest, based on a pasuk in Mishlei, Gomel Nafsho Ish Chesed, One who bestows goodness to himself is a man of kindness. Okay, so pasuk in Shmuel ve'eshpoch es nafshi. Okay, bottom line is that there's this idea that when we daven, who are we doing chesed to? Of course, one could say you're doing chesed because you're davening for other people, but it's deeper than that. The Rav Kook writes that our soul is constantly trying to talk to Hashem. It's like it's yearning for Hashem. Our soul is a part of Hashem, so it's like a magnet. It's like trying to connect to Hashem, but like we're muting it, right? I'm muting it because I'm working, I'm talking to someone else. But when we daven, we like open the spigot, like, and our neshama is able to do what it really wants to do. It's being stifled all day long. When we daven, we just open our mouth, we open the siddur, and boom, it just like explodes with tefillah, and it gives us this incredible. And so we're doing chesed to whom? To our soul. When we daven, that's a form of chesed as well. Okay, Tanar Rabbanan, we're talking about a very famous and beautiful story. A person who judges a fellow favorably is himself judged favorably. This story about a person, who went from the upper Galilee, he entered basically like an indentured servant, basically. Basically, he says, I'm going to work for you for 3 years, and after the 3 years, you're going to pay me a certain amount, okay? So he does that for 3 years. Erev Yom Kippur, was Erev Yom Kippur. Amar lo, he said, I want to go back home, and 3 years are up, give me the money that I'm owed, and I'm going to go back to my wife and children. Okay, this was done back in the day. Famous people, many people, went to America to work for a while, then they got paid, they brought their family over. So here he went to work for 3 years, and now it's time to go home. Okay, Amarlo, Ainli Mos, he says, the boss says, I don't have any money. He says, Amarlo Tainli Pira, says, give me produce. Amarlo Ainli says, I don't have any. Tainli Karka, give me land. Ainli says, I don't have any. Tainli Behemi, give me animals. Ainli, I don't have. Tainli Karmach says, give me pillows and cushions. Ainli, I don't have. Hivshil, Caleb, Nachorav, the worker, took his belongings, put it over his back, went back home dejected. Lacha Regel, after Sukkot, today. The homeowner took the worker's wages in his hands, and with that, and he took with him 3 donkey loads of goods, 1 donkey full of food, 1 donkey full of drink, 1 donkey full of sweet delicacies, and he went to the worker's house in the Galilee. After they ate and drank, he paid him, and then the boss turned to the former worker, and said, when I said that, when you said give me money and give me my wages, and I said I don't have any money, what were you suspecting me of? Like, what were you thinking? Maybe I thought that maybe some big deal came up. You needed some liquid, you need some cash. You took all your cash, invested in this new deal. Okay, and when I said, you said, give me livestock, and I said, I don't have any livestock, what do you suspect me? I said, maybe they were leased to others. When you asked for land, and I said, I don't have any land, what did you suspect me of? Maybe you leased the land to other people, so you can't give it to me. When I said I don't have produce, what do you think? Maybe there was no, you'd not give meiser. If you don't give meiser from the produce, you can't give it away. When I said I don't have any pillows or cushions, what do you think? You're in my house, you see all this stuff, like what's going on? Maybe you consecrated all your possessions to heaven. The employer says it's exactly by God's name, meaning by the divine service. It's a form of vow. That's exactly what happened. I vowed all my possessions to heaven because I have a son, Horkinus, who did not occupy himself in Torah, and I wanted to ensure that he would not benefit from all the wealth that I have, and therefore I gave it all to Shemaim, I gave it all to Hektish, and therefore I had nothing available to give to you, right? And when I came to my colleagues in the south, they came to some rabbis, they annulled all his vows, so therefore now I have the money to give you all the money. Okay, just like you judge me favorably, Hashem should judge you favorably as well. Okay, beautiful story. Now we're going to have 2 more stories where, as we'll see, these stories we're really going to be stretching our imagination. It's like, whoa, it does not look good. And nonetheless, these 2 people are going to be judged favorably. And the poskim points out there's really 3 categories. There's the middle category where you have a story where it could go this way, it could go that way. That's called dan l'chafeschos. We have an obligation to judge people favorably, to see them in a positive light, not a negative light. Then we have people who are not, we know that they are constantly sinning. Someone does not, let's say, keep kosher, keep Shabbos, whatever it is, and you see them, drive on Shabbos. You don't have to say, maybe they're going to the hospital. They drive on Shabbos. You don't have to come to that. You don't have to start down the chavschus because you know their track record in this regard. And then there's the opposite extreme where someone has a really impeccable track record of being a tzaddik, of being a righteous person. We should stretch ourselves to judge them favorably. Okay, so those are the 3 categories. I want to also mention this does not mean we should be foolish. So, for example, if it's a scenario where it could potentially harm other people, so we can't say, I'm going to dalach hafsos. I saw someone do something which looks very fishy and very, inappropriate or whatever it is. I'm going to dalach hafsos. You can't do that. That's actually usher because we also have a prohibition against standing idly by the blood of your friends. So you have an obligation to warn people, and et cetera, et cetera. So I just want, those are a very general introduction, but let's now read these stories. Tanar Bana, there's a story about a very pious person, a person that everyone knew as a pious person, Shepada Riva Achas Bastel, who ransomed a young Jewish girl from captivity. Captivity was kind of common, he redeems her. So he was with his students, and they went to an inn, and an inn didn't have like private suites, private rooms. Everyone slept in this big room, and he had her sleep right next to him. In the morning, he went into the mikvah, and only then he started teaching Torah to his followers. Now, to his students. Now, there's a halacha, a institution which was waived eventually, but the institution was that before learning Torah, you had to go to the mikvah. If a person had an emission, like they had intercourse, they had a seminal emission, they had nocturnal emission, then you're obligated to go to the mikvah before learning Torah. Okay, you would not be allowed to learn Torah. Okay, again, this was waived; we don't have to do so anymore. But that was the original decree. So she slept next to him, right, on the floor next to him, and then he goes to the mikvah, okay? And he turns to the students, he says, okay, guys, when you saw that I made her go to sleep right next to me, what do you suspect me of? Maybe there was one of the students who you don't trust so well, and that's why you don't want her sleeping somewhere else. You wanted her next to you, so you could keep an eye to make sure nothing inappropriate happened. And when I descended and immersed myself in the mikvah before teaching Torah, what did you suspect me of? Meaning, you presumably assumed that I was with her. No, Amarna, we said, we thought that maybe because there was a lot of travel and the exertion of travel could sometimes cause a person to have an emission, that maybe that's why you had a seminal emission. He says, I swear by God, by the divine service, that's exactly what happened. Just like you judge me favorably, Hashem should judge you favorably. Tanarban, another brisa. There's a certain communal matter which they had to go to a certain non-Jewish noblewoman who was very well connected, who might be able to help him. She called Dole Roman Tunas. The problem was that she was frequented by all the wealthy people of Rome. In other words, she was a prostitute. Amar mi yelech, okay, or she wasn't a prostitute, but she was involved in indecent behavior with many people. Amru mi yelech. The sage said, "Who's going to go?" Amar lahem Rabbi Yeshua ani yelech. Rabbi Yeshua said, "I'm going to go." Halach Rabbi Yeshua v'talmidav. Rabbi Yeshua and all his students went. Came to Shigil Pesach Beis. When he went to the door, chalatz tefillin b'richu karba amos v'nichnas v'nal adas b'fneim. He took off his tefillin. Okay, now why is that significant? Back in the day, they wore their tefillin all day. Now there's a number of rules. You can't go to the bathroom in tefillin. You also can't have intercourse with the tefillin on. So he took his tefillin off, okay, before he goes to the house. And then he closes the door and he closes the door behind him. Then after he comes out, he goes to the mikvah, and only then he starts teaching his students. So again, what does it look like? It doesn't look very good, right? He said, when I took my tefillin off, what did you suspect? We assume that you don't want tefillin which are holy to go into a place of impurity. Okay, when I close the door, what did you suspect me of? Maybe there was a private matter that you had to discuss and we weren't allowed to listen, and that's why he closed the door. Now, the post can point out there is a rabbinic decree that we are not allowed to be in seclusion with a non-Jewish woman, and this presumably took place before that decree, or else it would be forbidden from us to do so. Okay, when I went to the mikvah, what do you assume then? Or you probably assumed that I was with her. No, we said, we thought that maybe some spittle came out of her mouth. A person is tamei and they spit on you, and then you become tamei. So we thought that maybe while she was talking, some spit came out, it touched you, you became tamei. He says by the divine service, so it was. Just as you judge me favorably, may Hashem judge you favorably. Okay, let's go further. Now we're going to go to the end of the Mishnah. The end of the Mishnah spoke about the different items that are allowed to be moved. And the Gemara is going to ask about each one. Why do we need to know this? Okay, so we found in Truma Torah, the Mishnah says you're allowed to move Truma that is tahar. It's not muksa. The Gemara says, of course, Truma that's tahar is not muksa. It's it's regular food at that point. So once it's Truma, right? So the Gemara says, Lo tricha de man chabad Yisrael. We're talking about Truma, which is in the hand of a Yisrael. Truma is something which is given to the Kohanim. So Ma'adatim, I would have thought, since I, the Yisrael, cannot eat the Truma, therefore it's muksa to me. Since I could give it to a Kohen, it's therefore not muksa, and therefore it's not muksa for anyone. Udamai, the Mishnah says you're allowed to move away demai. Demai is food which we are not certain if it was tithe. So it's food that you buy from a person who is not learned, and therefore there's a concern. Maybe this is maybe the tithes have not been taken off, and therefore typically it should be muksa. So the Gemara asks, you can't eat it, so why is it not muksa? So the Gemara says, since in theory a person go ahead and they could relinquish ownership to all of their items. You could do this. You could go right now and say, I relinquish my ownership of every single item that I have, and once you do that, as we're about to see, then you are allowed to eat demai. The rabbinic prohibition of demai only applies to people who are not impoverished. If you're impoverished, even if you just make yourself impoverished right now, I say, I relinquish my ownership. I'm not doing this. I relinquish my ownership for all my items, then it's fit. So Hashanami Chazle, since you're able to theoretically do it, therefore it's fit for you right now, even though you can't eat it, and therefore it's not muksa. Just now we learned to the Mishnah. Okay, the Mishnah says you're allowed to feed poor people demai, and you're allowed to feed traveling soldiers demai. So what that means is as follows. If you're a poor person, you're going from door to door, you need food, and so the rabbis who instituted the rules of demai, they also incorporated a leniency they didn't want to impose on you, and they said, okay, we're not going to make the person be so strict. Presumably the tithes were taken off, but we don't want to go overboard. And therefore, we're going to let the person eat it, even though for a regular person they should not eat this food. And similarly, for soldiers, traveling soldiers need food, you're allowed to feed them demai. Okay, Rav Huna says, Tana Beishamai Omrim Ein Machilin Zanim Demai Ve'esach Sanim Demai. Beishamai says you're not allowed to feed those people. You are allowed to feed poor people demai. You're allowed to feed traveling soldiers demai. Okay, further in the Mishnah, Ma'aser Rishon the Mishnah says Ma'aser Rishon's truma has been removed. Okay, so Ma'aser Rishon is the food that's given to Leviim. Truma is the food that's given to a Kohen. Pshit, the Gemara says also Ma'aser Rishon it's perfectly permissible. Like, why in the world would it be muksa? What's the chiddush? What's the novelty? We're talking about a case where the Levi was a clever guy. Okay, so normally what happens like this: first you take away the truma gedola, you give to the kohen, okay, and then you give 10% to the Levi. Now the Levi, as we're about to see, is able to do a certain shtick. The Levi is able to meet you before you start piling up the grain. He's able to meet you, when you start collecting produce, and he's able to take his Ma'aser Rishon, and by doing so, he doesn't have to take from the Ma'aser Rishon and give to the Kohanim. So what does he do? He just saved himself a few percentage, right? Because if you first go ahead and give 1 or 2% to the Kohen, and then you take 10%, then the Levi gets a smaller portion. So if the Levi comes before it gets stockpiled, and he says, I want my portion now, he's allowed to do so, and he ends up saving a little bit. Okay, so he advanced the separation of the Ma'aser Rishon while the grain was still not piled up. And he took the Trumas Ma'aser, and the Trumas Ma'aser was taken. Okay, and the Trumas Gedola was not taken. Ma'aser Rishon, the one takes before the Trumas Gedola, Patrim and Trumas Gedola is permitted, meaning you don't have to give Trumas Gedola. Finally, from the second we learn that once you took the Ma'aser Rishon, you don't have to take the Truma Gedola from it. So why are you limiting it to when it's before it was piled? Even after it was piled. The pasuk says you have to, from all your gifts, you have to separate. So you see the pasuk says you have to separate an additional type of separation, implying that you do have to take Ma'aser Rishon, you do have to take, Truma Gedola, the Kohen's portion, even from the Ma'aser Rishon that was given to the Levi. So the Gemara says, Amar Isa, how do you know where to apply this? The Gemara says, Hai Idgan, Hai Idgan. The Gemara answers that by the case of the pasuk says that Meiser de Gancha, that it talks about the fact that the tithes are taken when it's already dagan. Dagan means when it's grain. It's grain when it's when it's already been like piled up. When it's smoothed into a pile, then it's called grain. Before that's not really called grain. And therefore, like Gemara says, because the pasuk says that you do have to give maestros when it's already dug and it's already piled up. Therefore, we learn from there that if the Levi takes it before it's piled up, then he gets to save himself that 1 or 2%. If he does it after it's piled up, then he does not get to save himself that 2%. Let's go a little further. Ma'aser Sheni, Pshita. Of course, the Ma'aser Sheni wasn't redeemed. It was redeemed, and the Gemara says you're allowed to move it. Now, what's Ma'aser Sheni? Ma'aser Sheni is produce that has to be brought to Yerushalayim and has to be eaten in Yerushalayim. Now, it's very difficult to bring a lot of produce. You're flying an airline, you have limits of baggage, right? So if you're taking a wagon, you don't schlep a lot of stuff. So what do? What you do is you say, okay, I have like $500 worth of produce. I transfer the Kiddush, the holiness, onto a $500 bill, okay? And then I take the $500 bill to Yerushalayim, small, right? Okay, if you whatever gold bills, whatever it is, but they had back then, and then I go to Yerushalayim and then I buy food over there. Fine. So I was able to transfer the kedusha. So the Mishnah told us that if I transferred the Meiser Sheni onto money, then the Meiser Sheni, which was redeemed, I'm allowed to move. Of course, that the Meiser Sheni now is no longer sanctified. So the Mishnah is obvious. Okay, I skipped one halacha, and that is that when I transfer, in order to demonstrate its sanctity, in addition to just transferring the kedusha, I also have to add a fifth. So if it's whatever, let's say $100 worth of produce, so I have to add an extra fifth of $50 worth of produce, I add $10, right? So I'm going to add, it's going to be $60, right? I have to add a fifth of the value. So hakamashman and chomesh ma'akev. If I didn't do so, no, it's illegal. I have to add a fifth. I have to make it $60, not $50, even though it's $50 worth of produce. But if I did so, it's still it is a good transfer of holiness, but even though I did something wrong, but it is a good transfer, and therefore the produce, even if I just put $50 out, not $60, which I should have done, it's still going to work. Okay, last lines of this Amud. The Mishnah said you're allowed to clear away dried tormos because it's food for goats. It says the Gemara dafka yavish v'lach lo, dry ones but not moist ones. My time, why? Came into marir lo achla. If it's moist, it's bitter, and even a goat would not eat it, and therefore it's only the dry ones and not the bitter one, not the moist ones. Have a wonderful day. Take care.